Welcome, class, to POS 475, Constitutional Law. Today we will be finishing up some cases on sex discrimination, then looking at discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, and then looking at discrimination on the basis of economic status. So we'll see how the court has approached discrimination in some other areas, right? So, Natalie.
Yes.
As we discussed at the end of our last lecture, if someone feels that they are being discriminated against on the basis of gender, if that's the classification, what test will the court apply? Heightened scrutiny, absolutely. Also called intermediate scrutiny, right? And the policy must be a substantially related means of accomplishing an important government objective. And the burden is on the government to prove that the policy is a substantially related means of accomplishing an important government objective. Otherwise, what will the court do to the policy?
Strike it down.
Strike it down, exactly. Very good. And so we ended with U.S. versus Virginia, right?
Yes, we did.
Yeah, we ended with U.S. versus Virginia. And the court struck down single-sex public universities, right? Okay. So basically, gender rights advocates women's rights advocates were winning, right?
Yep.
Did they win in Reed versus Reed?
Yeah, they
Yes.
did.
Did they win in Frontiero versus Richardson?
Yeah, they
Yes.
did.
Did they win in Craig versus Boren?
Yeah.
Yeah, they did. Did they win in the Mississippi case, doing with single-sex schooling?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, they did. Did they win in U.S. versus Virginia?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, they did. Okay. And in all those cases, the policy or the program or the practice or the procedure or the regulation, whatever the government action was or is called, was it upheld or struck down?
Struck down.
Struck down, exactly. So today we're going to look at some gender-based classifications the court has upheld, right? Okay, the first case we're going to look at is called Michael M. versus Superior Court of Sonoma County, 1981. And Natalie, I've told you about this one before.
Yeah.
So Michael M. His name was just reduced to an initial because he was 17 years old when this case first began. He was charged with violating a California law which prohibited an act of sexual intercourse accomplished with a female, not the wife of the perpetrator, where the female is under the age of 18 years, right? So he was 17. The girl was also under 18. Under this law, can he go to jail?
Yep.
Yes. Is she at any risk of going to jail?
Nope.
No. So, is the male disadvantaged in this situation?
Yep.
Yes. Does this policy discriminate on the basis of gender?
Yep.
Does it distinguish on the basis of gender?
Indeed it does.
Indeed it does. Yes. The question becomes, is that discrimination constitutional or unconstitutional, right? So, case went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court asked the state of California, why do you have this law? And if you're an attorney for the state of California, what do you argue?
Trying to reduce teen pregnancy.
We're trying to reduce teen pregnancy. Exactly. Right? Okay, so when it comes to the likelihood of getting pregnant, are men and women similarly situated?
No.
No. So, Rehnquist wrote the opinion on this one. And he basically said when men and women are not similarly situated, the law is not required to treat them the same. So, California was trying to reduce teen pregnancy rates, right? Is that a legitimate government objective?
I guess so.
Mm-hmm. It's legitimate. It's a legitimate government objective. So because men and women are not similarly situated when it comes to the likelihood of getting pregnant, what level of scrutiny will the court apply? The rational basis test, intermediate or heightened scrutiny, or strict scrutiny?
Intermediate.
No.
Oh.
That's why this is so important, right? This is what you need to be getting out of this lecture is when men and women are not similarly situated, the court does not apply heightened scrutiny. It applies the rational basis test. So, in general, the court upholds laws when it applies the rational basis test because the law, the policy, the practice, whatever it is, just needs to be rationally related to a legitimate government objective. So, as we just said, is reducing teen pregnancy rates a legitimate government objective?
Yep.
Yep. Throwing guys in jail for having relationships with girls who are under 18. Is that rationally related to reducing teen pregnancy rates?
Yep.
Yeah. Again, it doesn't have to be the most effective way of reducing teen pregnancy rates. You don't have to show that. Can you please just not?
Okay.
So you don't have to prove that it's the most effective way of reducing teen pregnancy rates or anything like that. All you have to do is show that it's rationally related. And actually, when you're applying the rational basis test, is the burden on the individual or the government? Individual, exactly. And so it's up to the individual to show that the policy is not even rationally related to a legitimate government objective, and the individual could not do that in that situation. Right? What do you think of that law?
Doesn't make a lot of sense, but whatever.
Yeah. Maybe you say whatever because you're not the guy sitting in jail.
Yeah.
I think it is a terrible ruling. And the reason I think it's a terrible ruling is if this were really enforced, how many 17-year-old and younger boys would be sitting in jails in the state of California?
If it's anything like the state of Alabama, a lot.
A lot, exactly. And so, in ways, you're kind of like, well, who do you go after? This one kid, right? So, in my opinion, the law should be struck down for the same reason the death penalty was struck down in Furman versus Georgia. It was being applied in a wanton and freakish manner, akin to being struck by lightning. So, to me, I would have made an Eighth Amendment argument, not an Equal Protection Clause argument, and say that it is not being consistently applied. It's being arbitrarily and capriciously applied in a wanton and freakish manner akin to being struck by lightning. So, in my opinion, if I were arguing this case, I wouldn't have argued it on Equal Protection Clause grounds. I would have argued it on Eighth Amendment grounds. What do you think of that?
Probably would have won.
Yeah. Too bad Michael M. didn't get me for his attorney. Instead, he lost. Anyway, okay. So, and I mean, again, just looking at 100% rationally, if you really want to reduce teen pregnancy rates, then you would make it illegal for both sexes, not just one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, that's Michael M. versus Superior Court of Sonoma County, 1981. And again, to me, disturbing precedent. That takes us to Rostker versus Goldberg. Also decided in 1981. So, under the Military Selective Service Act, the president can require every male citizen and resident alien between the ages of 18 and 26 to register for the draft. Okay? So, male.
Yes.
Citizen and resident alien. Okay, remember this was 1981. Case goes to Supreme Court. And Rehnquist wrote the majority opinion on this one. And hopefully you're starting to get to know Rehnquist a little better. Does he have a history of deferring to the states?
Yes.
He does. He does. Does he have a history of deferring to the military?
Uh-huh.
Yes, very much so. And so Rehnquist says we're basically going to defer to the judgment of Congress on this one and the military on this one. You know, so the military will go to Congress and they'll give recommendations, you know, and then Congress will take certain actions. And so the court said basically Congress has power to raise armies and navies. This power has clearly been given to Congress in the Constitution. So we're deferring to the judgment of Congress on this one, right? Also, again, it goes back into that idea of, are men and women similarly situated? And if they are not similarly situated, then the law does not require them to be treated the same way, right? So, at the time, Congress had determined that women were not eligible for combat duty at that time. So, consequently, men and women were not similarly situated with respect to the draft law. Because Congress has power to raise armies and navies, and who was eligible for combat, just men primarily at the time, right? So, this law, which distinguishes between men and women, was determined to be constitutional because men and women were not similarly situated with respect to the draft, because they were not similarly situated with respect to having to serve in active combat roles. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay, that was 81.
Mm-hmm.
But now, are women eligible for most combat roles?
Yep.
Yes. Consequently, see, this is important why the court writes down its reasons, right? Because now, if you follow things through to their logical conclusion, if men and women are both eligible for combat roles, should men and women also both be required to register for the draft?
Yes.
Yes. Right now, are women required to register for the draft?
Nope. If we have
No.
a war, I'm not required to go.
Yeah, there you go. So right now they are not required to register for the draft. So, basically, if this case were heard now, would women probably have to register for the draft?
Yep. I'd be
Yeah.
off to war.
Well, yeah, I mean, first you have to register for the draft, then you have to actually be drafted.
For dramatic effect.
Yeah, okay. There's an order here. You gotta register for the draft first, then you get drafted. Just because you have to register for the draft doesn't necessarily mean you'll be drafted. But anyway, so some people have said if a similar lawsuit were brought now, and it made it to the Supreme Court, women would have to register for the draft. So, if you're the Supreme Court, what strategy would you take right now?
I don't know. I would probably... I don't know. I really don't want to have to register. So, if I were the Supreme Court, I would probably have to reopen it. Can you reopen a case for the Supreme Court?
No, that's the thing. You just don't take another case.
Oh.
Yeah, or they control which cases they hear.
That's right. You can do that. That's
right. And so it's a way to avoid something that's going to be really politically sensitive, right? If we decide as a country to make women eligible for the draft, do you want that to go through the legal process or the political process?
Legal. Political.
That's why I'm asking. That's why you're here, Natalie,
okay.
to participate in these conversations. If we as a country decide to make women eligible for the draft, do you want that to go through the political process where we talk about it? Do we really want our daughters registering for the draft? Or do you want that going through the legal process where it is decided by the U.S. Supreme Court?
Oh, political.
Nah, help me out.
Hey!
You want 9 people making this decision or the whole country?
The whole country.
Well, there you go. That's one way to look at it. I know as a father of you, right now I'm not too impressed. But as a father of you, I'm entitled to my opinion on whether or not women should be eligible for the draft. Right?
Yeah.
And feel free to share that opinion with others. Try to persuade my friends and neighbors, right? And as the father of a 15-year-old daughter, I might not want her being required to register for the draft in 3 years.
Yeah.
So I don't know. People have different opinions on that, but again. The argument could be made something that politically sensitive maybe should go through the political process where we talk to our friends and neighbors, we elect officials, Congress debates it, we contact our elected officials, that type of thing, rather than the legal process. 9 members of the U.S. Supreme Court. Got it?
Got it.
Okay. All right. Now, so those were 2 cases where the Supreme Court upheld classifications on the basis of gender. What did they have in common?
I don't know.
Okay. What they had in common was the winners were able to make the argument that men and women are not similarly situated.
Ah.
Right? That's the way to win, right? Make the argument that men and women aren't similarly situated. And then what level of scrutiny will the court apply?
And the rational basis test.
Rational basis test, exactly. The lowest level of scrutiny. Very good. All right. Now, let's turn to a case dealing with discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. All right? Okay, now, Natalie.
Yes, Father.
Remember when we first started talking about Equal Protection Clause claims?
Yes.
Right? And the court looked at the nature of the classification that they were dealing with, right?
Yes.
And we looked at age and income and gender and race, and we asked a lot of questions about each of those classifications, right?
Yep.
Well, let's ask some similar questions about sexual orientation, right? Have people face discrimination on the basis of their sexual orientation?
Yes.
Yes, that makes it more similar to race. Is it easy to tell someone's sexual orientation when you first meet them?
Not really.
Not really. You can hide it if you want to, and a lot of people do, right?
Yep.
So that makes it more similar to age, right? And income. Age is hard to, but makes it more similar to income. Is your sexual orientation a trait which is present at birth and persists throughout your life?
I do not know.
Yeah, that one's up for debate right now, isn't it? I'm a heterosexual male. As far as I know, that's not likely to change anytime soon, right? But the thing is, among those who are, on the cutting edge of sexual orientation, scholarship, and debate, I don't know where they are right now on this issue, right? Because there's some people who say, yeah, your sexual orientation, that's something that you're born with and it persists throughout your life. There's other people that say, no, your sexual orientation is a little more fluid than that. It can change. Or maybe it can change for some people, but for other people it's pretty fixed, right? I'm like, okay, all right. And I'm not out to settle this debate right now, right?
Yeah.
But just in terms of constitutional law, right? When are you entitled to more protection? When you're dealing with a trait which is present at birth and persists throughout your life, or it's something that could change throughout your life?
Constitutionally, you're protected more when it's a trait that is present at birth and persists throughout your life.
Excellent.
Wow.
That's right.
Logic.
So the thing is, people, like I said, I don't do this stuff, right? I'm not on the cutting edge of sexual orientation scholarship. This isn't my field. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What is? Constitutional law. That's what I teach. And I'm here to tell you, just if I were an advisor, right, to the gay rights community, I would say, you have more constitutional protection if sexual orientation is understood as something that is present at birth and persists throughout your life.
Yeah.
Now, potential gold star for the day. Why is that, Natalie? Why do you have more constitutional protection if you're dealing with a trait that is present at birth and persists throughout your life?
Because it's out of your control.
Okay, that's part of it.
Dang it, I don't get my gold star.
Not really. Go back to what we said again about groups, right?
No. Now I know.
Okay.
Some people, not everyone will be a part of that group throughout their life.
Correct.
Now
right?
I get a gold star?
Pretty close.
Dang it!
So is it human, unfortunately, is it human nature to persecute some groups that you will never be a part of and you have never been a part of?
Yes.
Yes. So, see, that's why just from a constitutional standpoint, if sexual orientation is seen as something that is fluid, you're not entitled to as much protection. Because guess what keeps me as a heterosexual white male from persecuting homosexual white males?
What keeps you from persecuting them?
Yeah.
Moral decency?
Exactly. But if I'm making the sexual orientation is fluid argument, then I'm saying self-interest keeps me from persecuting homosexual white males because I could wake up and find myself in that group one day.
I see.
Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So, I didn't want to, overplay that too much, but you get the point, right? Is how sexual orientation is perceived will have consequences for how the court views sexual orientation as a classification, and consequently what test it applies, and whether it apply a lower level of scrutiny or a higher level of scrutiny.
That's important.
That is important, actually, and that's why we took the time to go over that. Okay, so next thing, sexual orientation. Are they a discrete and insular minority?
Yes.
Yeah, they're less than 50% of the population, right? So unfortunately, can political processes be used to disadvantage them?
Yes.
Yeah, right? Okay, so now that takes us to Romer versus Evans, where exactly this happened. Political processes were used to disadvantage people on the basis of their sexual orientation. Okay, so, Natalie.
Yes.
You have driven through Colorado.
I have driven through Colorado.
You have driven through Colorado.
Many times.
Yes. What do you remember about Colorado?
Everyone is very fit.
Okay, yeah, actually, they're one of the most fit states in
and
the
that's not
country.
just a stereotype. No, you walk outside of your hotel room and everyone is working out. It's like everyone.
Yeah, it's very fit. Okay, is there a lot of farming when you get to western Colorado? Remember, west of Denver? Yeah, a lot of farming. Are there a lot of mountains, and consequently, is there a lot of mining?
Yes.
Do you remember seeing a lot of
mining?
mining?
Yeah, we had to drive through the mountains.
Yes.
Dynamite
And you remember seeing the mining operation? Okay, so mining, farming. Are these usually liberal or conservative groups?
Conservative.
Conservative. Farmers, people in the extractive industries, mining oil, those are conservative. Yes, these are the Earth's resources and we use them. Usually very conservative. But then also, did they legalize marijuana in Colorado?
Yeah, bro.
Yeah, they did. Because even though you have a lot of farmers, you have mining, you have these really conservative elements. The Air Force has a base there, Yeah, you also have some really liberal towns, like Aspen and Denver, and a lot of really wealthy
Yeah, a bunch of lacrosse kids.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
That's when we met the infamous lacrosse kids.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, in Colorado, towns like Aspen were passing anti-discrimination statutes and saying you can't discriminate against anybody on the basis of their sexual orientation, right? Okay, so were gay rights advocates able to use the political process to their advantage in certain towns in Colorado?
Yes.
Yeah, they're winning in places like Denver and Aspen because they're politically active And, within those towns, they can be vocal enough and have political power enough that they can get what they wanted passed into law. Well, how do you think that's going to go over in the farming and the mining areas?
Not very well.
Not very well, right? So, through a citizen initiative, they circulated a citizen initiative that said basically any government entity in the state of Colorado, including these towns, they can't pass these laws banning discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Yeah. So, the case went to the Supreme Court, right? And if you're the state of Colorado, keep in mind this was passed by citizen initiative.
Yeah.
If you're the state of Colorado, how do you defend this law?
Don't really know.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Colorado's just sitting there and they're like, don't know. If have state laws been passed to ban discrimination on the basis of race?
Yes.
Yes. Sex?
Yes.
Yes. Ethnicity?
Yes.
Yes. All the usual suspects, right? So you can use the political process to pass anti-discrimination statutes for all those things, right?
Yeah.
But not sexual orientation. Yeah, exactly. And so the court said, what government objective are you trying to accomplish by preventing the gay rights community from using the political process where possible?
I do not have a government objective, Your Honor.
Exactly. And so the court said, animus, hostile feelings toward the gay rights community. That's the only explanation for why you would pass a law saying this one particular group is not allowed to use the political process to pass anti-discrimination statutes against them.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Anti-discrimination statutes that protect them. Yeah. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, go back to our discussion, Nat.
Okay.
What constitutional test is the court going to apply?
Over here. Over here.
Rational basis test?
No.
Heightened scrutiny?
Yeah.
Strict scrutiny?
Yeah.
No. They struck it down using their lowest level of scrutiny.
Oh.
Yeah, they struck it down using the rational basis test. They said there's not even a legitimate government objective here. It was obvious this was motivated by hostility toward the gay rights community. Make sense?
Yeah.
Now, how do you think Scalia responded to this?
Oh, Scalia. Let me think. I think Scalia would be like, not in the Constitution.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly, basically. Yeah. He said, it was passed by citizen initiative. That's a process that's available to citizens in the state of Colorado. Yeah. Yep. And if the gay rights community in the state of Colorado did not like it, then the political process is available to them.
Yep.
The thing I don't like about this argument, honestly, though, is the gay rights community was using the political process. They were using it at the local level, right? So I kind of don't really find Scalia's argument terribly convincing, right?
Yeah.
Because he's almost saying, oh, you're allowed to use the political process at the state level, but not the local level where you've been winning.
Yeah.
Right? So I find his argument kind of unconvincing, honestly. In a way, his argument acknowledges that there's going to be some levels where you lose because you're not more than 50% of the population. And yeah, I may, say I really support the gay rights movement, I may be able to convince the people of Aspen to pass an anti-discrimination statute, right?
Yeah.
But I may not be able to convince the whole state of Colorado yet, right?
Yep.
So, I don't know. I don't find his dissent totally convincing. But he also makes another interesting argument, and this is kind of interesting. Am I allowed to not hire someone because I don't like the school they went to?
Oh, I guess so.
Yeah. Am I allowed to not hire someone because, for basically a lot of reasons. So I'll just read you his argument here. It's kind of interesting. When the court takes sides in the culture wars, it tends to be with the knights rather than the villains, and more specifically with the Templars, reflecting the views and values of the lawyer class from which the court's members are drawn. So he's saying members of the Supreme Court, they've all gone to outstanding schools. They all tend to have similar views. How that class feels about homosexuality will be evident to anyone who wishes to interview job applicants at virtually any of the nation's law schools. The interviewer may refuse to offer a job because the applicant is a Republican, because he is an adulterer, because he went to the wrong prep school or belongs to the wrong country club, because he eats snails, because he is a womanizer, because she wears real animal fur, or even because he hates the Chicago Cubs. Right?
Scalia is interesting.
This is classic Scalia. But if the interviewer should wish not to be an associate or partner of an applicant because he disapproves of the applicant's homosexuality, then he will have violated the pledge which the Association of American Law Schools requires all its member schools to exact from job interviewers: assurance of the employer's willingness to hire homosexuals. So he's saying basically the court's ruling this way because they've gone to these, in the court's case, elite law schools, which have decided to support the gay rights community. That's the argument he makes. Anyway, on we go. So, back to this, just so we're 100% clear. This is one of the biggest cases dealing with discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. The court was able to strike it down just using its lowest level of scrutiny, rational basis scrutiny, because there wasn't even a legitimate government objective. And so it still leaves up in the air whether in other cases the court may apply a higher level of scrutiny. Just like the court did once they got to Craig versus Boren in the gender discrimination cases. Remember the early cases, Reed versus Reed and Frontiero versus Richardson? They were striking those down using the rational basis test. But then in Craig versus Boren, they bumped it up to intermediate scrutiny or heightened scrutiny. So the possibility exists a court will do a similar thing with sexual orientation. That possibility exists. Okay, now let's move on to discrimination based on economic status. And the main case we want to look at here is San Antonio Independent School District versus Rodriguez, which was decided in 1973. So Natalie.
Yes.
14th Amendment.
14th Amendment.
Says no state shall deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Right?
Yes.
If you live in Clara.
I do live in Clara.
You do live in Clara. And say you get an average of $3,000 per pupil spent on your education. Compared to someone who lives up in Mountain Brook. And say they're getting about $9,000 a year per pupil being spent on their education, would you feel like you are being denied the equal protection of the laws?
Well, yeah.
I think that's a good argument. So that's exactly the argument that was made in San Antonio Independent School District versus Rodriguez. Okay. Say, again, we're going to do a little more math today, Nat. Hang in there with me. Say the average property in a certain area of San Antonio, the average property is worth $40,000. Right? If you tax that at 1%,
yes.
How much will you generate in revenue? $400. Very good. Woo! Don't spend it all in one place. Okay. Now say your average properties in an area are $400,000.
The bougie area.
Yeah, if you tax that at 1%, how much you gonna bring in? $4,000. Where would you rather be going to school? In the area where most of the properties are worth $40,000, or where most properties are worth $400,000? $400,000. Why not? Okay, now let's look at the next kind of crazy thing that goes on here. In these lower area school districts, they want the best for their kids.
Well, everyone
right?
does.
Yeah, you know.
Unless you hate your children.
Yeah, they know they're not generating enough revenue here, so they'll double their property tax rates, right?
Whoa.
Rather than 1%, we'll pay 2%, right?
$800.
Well, exactly. So whoop-de-doo. Now you make $800 per pupil. Well, these guys are still way ahead of you at $4,000, right?
Yeah.
And so even if I triple it, for a $1,200, I'm still way behind. And pretty soon you're like, good heavens, we can only pay so much in taxes as a percentage of what our property's worth, right? And so that was the situation in San Antonio. You had some areas that were really wealthy right next to other areas that were really, really poor, right? So a lawsuit was filed. Case went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled for the school district, ruled for the state. And they said a couple of interesting things. First, number one, economic status is not a suspect classification. Right? Again, is that something that could change throughout your life?
Yes.
Yes. So income, economic status, you call it different things, wealth, it can change throughout your life. Consequently, it's not a suspect classification, right? Also, is it possible to move from one district to another to find a place in a really wealthy district and just rent while your kids are in school?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's possible, right? So if it's really important to you, the court said you can find ways. You're able to rent. Right? Yeah, I know. That's what the court argued, right? They also said, and this we'll talk about more in a second. They also said education is not a fundamental right. And that's one of the reasons why this was subject to a lower level of scrutiny. Because education is not a fundamental right, according to the court. Thurgood Marshall dissented.
Whoa.
Yes, Thurgood Marshall dissented, and he said, absolutely, education is a fundamental right because it makes possible the exercising of all your other rights. Which I've always thought was an extremely good argument, right? How valuable are your free speech rights if you are not smart enough to articulate an argument clearly?
Not very valuable.
Not very valuable. You grunt, bad. The coronavirus locked up. You know.
Get him out of here.
Exactly. So, when you start looking at your other rights, freedom of speech, press, religion, but assembly, right to petition government for a redress of grievances.
Yes.
He says education is critical in helping you to exercise all of these other fundamental rights effectively. Right? And the court is basically left with the argument, well, good enough. Yeah, and so it's an interesting argument. They say basically, at least where wealth is involved, the Equal Protection Clause does not require absolute equality or precisely equal advantages. So does not require precisely equal advantages. I don't know. I think when it comes to education, actually, kids are entitled to an equal amount being spent on their education, right? One is they're under 18, they can't vote, right?
Indeed, I cannot vote.
That's right. And so I think in that way they're vulnerable. And the court has a special responsibility to protect discrete and insular minorities, particularly those who can't vote, and are counting on the adults to make responsible policies for them. So, in Canada, good old Canada,
yep.
Are instructional expenditures per pupil across school districts in Canada.
Seems like they should be equal. It sounds like a Canada.
They are, absolutely. The one thing that's allowed to differ a little bit is transportation costs, because those can be so different between rural areas and urban areas.
Well, yeah, if you look out in Canada.
Yeah. But otherwise, instructional expenditures per pupil, my understanding is they keep them the same up in Canada. So, anyway, so is income a non-suspect classification?
Yes.
Yep. And the court says we're just applying rational basis scrutiny here. And, these are legitimate policies, and they're not required to be exactly equal. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Well, class, it's been a pleasure. Take care, and we'll see you next lecture.